Excellency. First of all, great good morning in USA, Canada, good afternoon in UK, Europe, Africa, good evening in Asia Pacific, Ireland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great day to welcome one of the most respected, most talked about, dynamic Army General, known as Lieutenant General A.K. Singh, PVSM, AVSM, SM, VSM, an outstanding Army Commander and Lieutenant Governor to this prime time series called New DNA of Leadership. Your Excellency, welcome, sir, and it is indeed my honor to have you on this show, sir.
Mr. Bakshi, it was such a pleasure to connect with you the other day. You are such a dynamic and multifaceted personality, and I'm looking forward to today's tea with you. But before we start, let me remind ourselves and all the viewers that today happens to be the 49th anniversary of Vijay, when we won the 1971 war against Pakistan and gave birth to Bangladesh. I think we start the Golden Jubilee year today, and it's good time to remember that it was India's finest hour. I don't think we've had a better hour than that. And it was made possible by the sacrifices and bravery of the armed forces of our country. And it's time to also remember and pay tribute to those who laid down their lives for the country in that war and in many other conflicts before and after that. We can start whenever you are ready.
Very great, Your Excellency, sir. That is quite fascinating. You gave us the details of, we are starting 50th year of 1971 Mukti Bahini War. We call it Mukti Bahini. And so nice of you. And I don't know where from the voice is coming. My Facebook is off now. And let me first have the honor to introduce such a great personality we have today. Varsha, can you check why the voice is coming back? Varsha, please check.
Just a minute, sir.
Yeah. Yes, your voice is also coming back. Lieutenant General Ajay Kumar Singh is the former Commander-in-Chief of Southern Command of Indian Army. Lieutenant General is an alumnus of Sainik School, Riva, and National Defense Academy, we call NDA. Known for his great service to the nation, he has been awarded regularly for bold, effective decision-making in the army. One of the well-known army generals India has ever produced. He, after the retirement from the army, took over as 11th Lieutenant Governor of Andaman and Nicobar Islands on 8th July 2013. He was also given the additional responsibility of administration of Puducherry from July 2014 to May 2015. Lieutenant General is known for his contribution as Andaman Society by starting Andaman Medical College, Animas Degree College in South Andaman and Cork. He has opened the Raj Nivas to common people and school children on select day. A citizen charter was also introduced during his tenure. His decisions were based on wide consultations, but once a decision was taken, he did not tolerate any delay or any obstruction. That talks about the leadership. The botanical gardens in the center of Port Blair, which he conceived, stands a reminder of his extraordinary commitment. The Lieutenant Governor, in his deep sense of understanding problems being faced by common people, left a huge impression on the islanders With his deep sense of commitment, his extraordinary competence combined with transparency and very high integrity. When he left on completion of the tenure, his farewell speech was so emotional that hardly there was any dry eye in the audience. He promised that day that he will remain an islander by heart and also a stakeholder in the well being for them. Lieutenant Governor, who has acceptability among all islanders, sincerely wanted to return. His famous quote was here, निकले थे अकेले मंजिल की ओर लोग मिलते गए और कारवां बनता गया. For those who are not able to understand Hindi, I have left towards a mission alone, but people kept on becoming part of my, and we made a caravan. During his tenure, he traveled to almost all the places of the island by road, by boats, by motorcycles in the remotest areas. Lieutenant General, during his tenure, did big or small, everything got benefited in the tourism industry of Andaman, touched various new heights, and took prompt, quick decisions in the Andaman tourism. In a short span, he connected the common people and, like a true general of the army, he led the administration of Ireland from the front. Wow. As ACCI cannot forget the way he was himself on the ground. The relief on 26 January boat tragedy in Cyclone, Hudhud, Anishi scheme, the medical colleges are few things these islanders will ever be grateful for him. He was one who inspired ACCI to start Andaman Marathon and the annual cycling event, and it is known to be a regular practice there. A tsunami of emotions poured in Andaman social media circles very recently after the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, launched Chennai, Andaman, and Nicobar Islands submarine optical fiber cable project and connected the far-flung islands of Bay of Bengal with mainland India on August 10, 2020. You know what happened? The waves of emotions hit the social media pages where therefore Lieutenant General A.K. Singh retired, former Lieutenant Governor of Andaman Nicobars, who left the island in 2016, but still remains in the hearts of thousands of islanders. This talks volumes about the leadership qualities, attributes of General Singh. When you talk about General Singh to anybody in the island, they will talk only great things because in short tenure, whatever he started doing has become a benchmark in the entire island. From getting in principal approval from central government of CANI SME project for convincing the Department of Telecom to increase satellite bandwidth for Andamans, till completion of the project, his proactive role is being remembered. He influenced virtually every field of work, be it tourism, tribal, environmental issues, shipping, aviation, fisheries, agriculture. And his main focus, however, remained on health and education, as he felt these are the crucial to the future well-being of islanders, allocating almost 18% of the budget to this. And not only that, medical college, but he also driving force in setting up Andaman's Law College, a second college called ANCOL, a community college for rural population. So when we talk about people, and when I was doing a survey, he was the only lieutenant governor to start weekly flights, services between Port Blair and tribal polluted Car Nicobar Islands, making life easy for government servants on posting and also for tribal population. The best example of leadership of General Singh is in front of public when a devastating cyclone, Leher, hit Andaman and Nicobar Island during his tenure. Interestingly, Only a few weeks before cyclone, Lieutenant Governor had ordered for a state-level drill for disaster preparedness. The drill was helpful in identifying and remedifying fault lines. To everyone's utter shock, people saw Lieutenant Governor coming out of Raj Niwas, driving police jeep himself with team of officials sticking behind and driving to the remotest part of southern Andaman. He drove over fallen trees, snapped lines to meet people. My God, the profile is so profound. And I can keep on talking and talking about it. There's no end, but then I need to move forward. Sir, Your Excellency General Singh, indeed my pleasure. And I am grateful to Pankaj Dubey, who connected me to you. And I had the honor of meeting you 2 days back over lunch. And those 3 hours, ladies and gentlemen, was itself leadership lessons. And I had with me our manufacturing excellence leader, Ravinder Kachru. We had a fascinating time. Sir, we are on Zoom. The format would be that I will have some questions for you, and our people who are audiences are on various platforms: YouTube, Global Talent TV, Zoom, and Facebook. They will park their questions. And once I am through with you, I will take up some questions from them. However, on the Zoom, I will unmute attendees so that they can ask the questions themselves. That is how the format is going to be. Your Excellency, do I have the permission to start with my questions?
Bakshiji, before you start, let me ask you, am I audible? Am I
Absolutely.
clear? Right. Let me say, जो कुछ कहना था आपने कह दिया, बचा क्या है? Anyway, you've been very kind, very eloquent. But let me, before you start asking me questions, let me say an opening line about the topic. And the topic is new DNA of leadership. So I said, let me first see and understand what is this new DNA of leadership that Bakshiji is talking of. What is DNA? It is probably one of our most important molecules, a molecule that stores all the information and tells the cells what is to be done. Now, DNAs are evolutionary in nature. Over generations, over decades, over centuries, there is a change that happens in DNA because of the environmental factors and their effect on the DNA, plus certain random mishaps that occur, which happen to force you to change your DNA. Same goes, Bakshiji, for leadership. I would say that the DNA of leadership are those core values that have evolved over centuries, have undergone some minor changes, and are continuing to change as we evolve further and meet new environmental factors. But before we go further, we have to be very clear what is that key DNA of leadership that we must understand. And I think in whatever way you may call it, I would say that these are those attributes that must be there in every leader in some form or the other, to a larger measure or a smaller measure. And I would, to simplify, just sum them up by saying that you could call them the 5 C's, capital C. And I would name them character, courage, both physical and moral, competence, commitment, and compassion. Now, it's not necessary that every leader must have all of them, but yes, bulk of them must be present in the leader for him to be recognized as a great leader. Bakshiji, the floor is open to you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I think you have laid down a very good, situation of moving forward. And I love this 5 C's of new DNA: character, courage, competence, commitment, and compassion. And I would certainly like that all of us who are listening to your leadership lesson today and your journey of excellence today, we all will be benefited by your not only these 5 C's, but your actual work which you have done during 2 regimes, one as a Lieutenant General, Commander of Indian Army. We feel proud of Indian Army. And I want to give a big round of applause to the Indian Army, because whatever we are today, Indian Army is, we feel proud of them and they do great job for the country. And then second, you had an innings of Lieutenant Governor. So you had both, one side leading Indian Army and other side leading a civil services job wherein you were the CEO of that island. As there was no chief minister, there was nothing. So our discussions today will certainly make an impact wherein I would ask you some of the stuff to share from your excellent journey. Sir, your leadership journey is awesome. When I was researching about you, and I was trying to find out what an amazing, beautiful journey you had. But I wanted to look at your that child in you, sir, when you went to the Sainik school and finally to NDA, and you were, encompassing those things at that point of time, not knowing what the future will be, and reaching to this level. Was it in a way that your parents, your mentors, who could guide you, support you? Can I know about your student as well as a childhood quick journey before we go to the main topic of new DNA? Because each one of us, when we grow in life, and that is the time when something gets firmed up in our mind. You are muted, sir. You're muted. Sir, you're muted.
Yeah. Bakshiji, all of us are greatly influenced by our formative years. That includes the years that you spend with your family as a child, your school days, and then the stepping stones, whether it be university. In the case of army officers, it's NDA, IMA, what say you? We get influenced by what we see, what we observe. We get influenced by how we are treated, because that forms an impression. As far as I am concerned, I was fortunate to grow up in a very loving and positive environment in a typical Indian family. Father, a well-educated businessman, mother, a housemaker, and 3 sisters, each of whom has done exceptionally well in life, and we can mention it later. As a family, we saw good times, but we also saw hard times. We saw crisis, and that actually strengthened our resolve on many fronts. While we did not inherit, my father was a rich businessman, but we did not inherit much wealth. But what he gave us was exceptional education. Can you imagine, in a typical Indian household, my elder sister was sent to boarding in class 1. And she later rose to be India's ambassador to United States. I followed soon thereafter in class 7 to Sainik School, and thereafter joined the National Defense Academy. Let me say, my decision to join the armed forces through the National Defense Academy was not a very deep-rooted decision. It was a decision which comes when your friends decide to go and do something and you become part of that. So all of us went, appeared for the exam, did the SSB, I qualified. My father was supportive, my mother was against it, but we prevailed and I joined the NDA. There was no looking back. From the day that, Bakshiji, that I joined NDA, which was on 7th of July, 1969, and it looks long back now, my complete identity has got linked to this uniform. And before I talk of NDA, let me just elaborate on this a little. once I was trying to explain to my younger son what is the connect that I had with the uniform. And I said, Bede, what you do is please go on the internet. All kids are tech savvy. I said, go on the internet and type AK Singh. And he said, Baba, there are thousands and thousands of hits on that. I said, now please go and type Lieutenant General AK Singh. There was one hit and number of pages on that. So I said, that is what I am. You remove this tag of Lieutenant General and my identity gets lost amongst a milieu. You put that tag, that is what the Indian Army does. And we become a part and parcel of the Indian Army. Let me talk of NDA. NDA turns young greenhorns into men of substance, physically fit, mentally agile, and taking the first steps to being young dynamic leaders who will lead men into battle. NDA gets cadets from all regions, religions, classes, all kinds of people from a rich background, poor background, all kinds of places. And in the 3 years you spend in NDA, they bring you on a common platform where your total focus is on the job that is to be done. It helps you come to a common denominator where merit is the only criteria. In today's world, not everywhere you find that merit takes you ahead. For example, I had no connect in the army. I didn't know anyone in the army, came from a civil background. But that's what the army does. It gives you equal opportunities and it's for you. NDA helped us dive deep within and pick out the hidden reservoirs that lay within us. I never knew that these kind of reservoirs were there. And when you are in NDA, you're not dreaming of becoming a general or leading an army and things like that. Your prime focus is to get commissioned into your regiments and battalions and then lead men at the cutting edge. And finally, NDA builds in you the most essential traits that are required for a military leader: trust, camaraderie, and team spirit. Without these, I think, at least in the armed forces, you cannot go very far. So I will not go into too many details, but I think that was an overview of my early formative years.
Beautiful. Amazing, sir. I would like to salute you for what you are, sir. As I look like an army officer. I am not being an army officer, but I behave like an army officer in terms of discipline, for sure. And hats off to you and your commitment of driving the trust and the team spirit has been a hallmark of your personality. People talk about you. And you rightly said that when you tell your son to Google AK Singh and when you tell your son to Google Lieutenant General AK Singh, there's one and only one Lieutenant General AK Singh. Sir, General Singh, now when you moved out of NDA, you moved to next level of excellence. And I am talking about your different roles as army officer and then army commander. There must be some of the beautiful events and experiences which would attract to people become what you have attained. You are a role model. You are a brand in yourself. People will be, and especially Gen Next, will be looking at you. Those who are watching you now and or will watch you later would like to know your life experiences as an army commander. One or two case studies, which can make all of us to learn from those experiences. Sir, mute.
I think I have to unmute and well, DK, and incidentally, for those who don't know, Mr. Bakshi was named as DK, Dilip Kumar. His father had a fascination for our film stars, and he was named as Dilip Kumar, his brother named as Ashok Kumar. That's what you told me the other day. Well, DK, the next level at which, in fact, my main molding that took place in the army was in my regiment, 7th Light Cavalry. It's a tank regiment. With that time we had Russian T-55 tanks. Today we have T-90s. It's a 240 years old regiment. My basic grounding happened there. The atmosphere in the regiment allowed me to flourish, to make mistakes and grow. Play tough games with the troops so that you start bonding with them and earn their respect and admiration. We were encouraged to develop finer military basic skills. Just 1 second. There was some disturbance, sorry. And very early in my service, with about 4 years of service, I was detailed to go as ADC to Governor of Himachal. That was Nawab Sahab Loharu, who was normally it is by selection, but in my case it was by detailment because he was he was the ruler of Loharu, and he had served as an honorary major in my regiment. So out there I went and spent 2 years with him, traveled all over, met all kinds. And what if I was to express in one word what it did to me, it was to remove the fear of authority. At a very young age, I lost the fear of authority and therefore was never influenced by a coercive domination from any authority. You could argue with me, you could tell me logically, but that fear went away. Thereafter, I had two very uncommon exposures. I was detailed, selected to undergo a tank troops command and staff course in then USSR in Moscow, where I did a 1-year study on tanks and the employment of large formations in war based on their World War II experience. And soon thereafter, after 3-4 years, I topped the staff college exam and was detailed to do my staff college in UK as part of NATO. So at a very young, impressionable age, I was able to see two contrasting systems, the Soviet system and the NATO system at the height of Cold War. In India, at least, there is hardly anybody who has had this opportunity. And that developed my basic understanding of military strategy and operational art. And Bakshi Sahib, if I have to be frank, I never looked back on these two subjects because they are the main subjects. And I think if you talk in the army, most people would acknowledge these two very fine attributes that I developed at a very young age. This was followed by almost 3 assignments in the Makkah of the army, the military operation director. I probably had the longest service, 5.5 years, over 2 assignments, but 3 desks that I held. And thereafter, I headed the foreign division of the Indian Army, which allowed me and gave me exposure worldwide. Thereafter, I was Director General Perspective Planning, where I looked at the long-term plans of the Indian Army and what capabilities we required. Also was instrumental in organizing a transformation study for the Indian Army. Unfortunately, that was not implemented in full. It was a very, very remarkable study. And even today, the changes that are occurring are being largely influenced by the study that I did. Let me tell you give you a short glimpse of my assignments both in command and staff. In command, I did all the assignments. I commanded 7th Cavalry, my regiment, and I waited for army officers. Let me just state, I was telling someone, I waited 2.5 years after being approved to take over my own regiment. I refused to go anywhere else. I said, I need to hang my hat on this peg where I've got commission. 2.5 years, Bakshiji, a lot of people said you are finished, but God has been kind. I commanded the 1st T-90 Brigade of the Indian Army in Op Parakram, commanded the White Tiger Armored Division, one of our most powerful forces, Then Strike One, our premier offensive corps, which led the offensive against Pakistan both in 65 in Sialkot sector and in 71 in the on the Western Front. And thereafter was lucky enough to be assigned to take over the Southern Army. Southern Army dealt with 42% of India's landmass, the borders in Rajasthan, Gujarat, which are very decisive and important for us. And I dealt with 10 states and 4 UTs. In the staff assignments, I've already told you, I've only been on operational assignments. I've hardly had any tenure as an instructor or some other assignment, which are also important. But I've been always focused, 3 tenures in 3 assignments in military operations. I was brigade major of the Kargil brigade, which being a tankman, it gave me a unique opportunity to have a look at the mountains. Then staff tenures in senior ranks, I've already mentioned, the foreign division and the perspective. Let me share with you 1 or 2 moments in the army for the general audience that is at hand. Let me talk when my first tenure in military operations as grade 1 officer, lieutenant colonel in MO4. And this was somewhere in 91, 92. And I'm talking about the induction of the Arjun tanks. Our chief then, General Rodericks, one day we came to our office and saw the headlines on the paper. The Indian Army chief accepts 2 regiments, orders 2 regiments of Arjun tanks. Now that came as a bit of a dampener because we were still not ready to accept Arjun till it met all the criteria. It had still not met the user acceptance. So my director looked at me and he said, well, young lad, are you going to do something about it? I said, sir, I'll put up a note. So Bakshiji wrote a 1-paragraph note. It still rests in Military Operations Directorate. And that note in essence read the following: that with a very deliberate decision, we have decided to go for a 9-month pregnancy. Then why this hurry to have a premature delivery at 6 or 7 months? And this is the kind of note I wrote, marked it to my director. It went right up the channel and we never saw it. After about a month, the DGMO, General Raghavan, walks into our office. He's a tiny man. We used to call him, he was a tall man professionally. And we used to call him the Chinaman. He walked into our office, came to the director's table and thumped a file there and walked out. So obviously all of us were curious what's in the file. It was the same file which we had initiated. So my director called me and all of us in the office, and he read out what was written in the file. Nobody had written anything. Everybody in the chain had initialed it. It went to the chief. And in chief's hand was written that, let me take this opportunity to assure the team, the Indian Army, that your chief has encouraged the indigenous production by giving in principle approval, but has nowhere said that they will not be up to the quality. We will accept them when they meet our quality requirement. So that was reassuring. But his second line was even more, let's say, motivating. He said, I'm very proud of the fact that the Indian Army still can produce lieutenant colonels who can write such a piece to their chief. I compliment you all. So, I'm narrating, I was just a lieutenant colonel with maybe less than 20 years service. And we were writing to the chief. Let me narrate another incident. And this was in my 3rd assignment in military operations as director MO5. MO5, Military Operations 5, is the mother section of the Indian Army. Nothing happens in the Indian Army till Director MO5 has endorsed it. Mainly responsible for the capability development. And as we had mobilized for Operation Parakram, there was a shortage of huge ammunition for the tanks. A briefing was called by the Master General Ordnance for our chief. All of us were present. Everybody was star rank. I was the only colonel since it was my desk. And the MGO gave a presentation, sir. Yes, there is a shortage, but in 1 week we are getting 50,000 round. In 10 days, we'll get 100,000 round from the Ordnance Factory Board, who are manufacturing it. So General Padmanabhan, our chief, had a sense of humor. So he looked at him and he said, so the MGO is telling the chief that I need not take a discipline as yet. And so everybody was amused, and we were to move to the next agenda till I raised my voice and said, sir, can I say something? He said, come up. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I came up, and so he said, yeah, Colonel AK, what do you have to say? I said, sir, I fully appreciate that the chief need not take a discipline as yet, but as your director MO5 responsible for the operational readiness of the Indian Army, I would strongly recommend to my chief to keep a discipline and a glass of water next to his bedside and on his office table. And you know, the intermediate bosses looked at me as though they would eat me up, but I was speaking the truth. And of course, so there are many such incidents where one went around. Another incident I remember, I was commanding the, there are many more and I won't sort of labor on them, but let me just say one more. I was commanding the armored division in Jhansi, and I had a boss, I won't name him, all army people will understand, very professional, well-respected corps commander I had, who was very tough. And there was almost fear psychosis about him. He was strict. He was himself very soldierly and expected everyone like that. So people were generally afraid. And I decided that I've always believed, Bakshiji, that it's just not your mind. It's also your heart that plays a role. Because after all, you are going into battle where lives will be lost. It is just not a mind game. It is a mind and heart game. So I requested the corps commander once to come and speak to the whole division on the heart and mind combination.
Wow.
And initially he resisted. He said, no, I'll speak on some. But finally I persisted and he came and spoke. And he spoke very emotionally. And in that, he also narrated his own life story of how he had gone through various trials and tribulations. And I think he moved all of us. So in my summing up, I said to him, I said, General, till today, you had the authority to lead us by virtue of the appointment that you are holding. But today you have earned the right to lead this armored division into battle, and they will follow you to any place that you order us to go. So these are some incidents which I thought you wanted to know something about my time as Army Commander. Well, both as a Strike Corps Commander and as Army Commander, my prime focus did remain on operations. So as Corps Commander, we did one of the largest exercises, 1,000 tanks, 100,000 troops, exercise Yodha Shakti in the desert in the peak of summer. And I did a similar exercise, Sudarshan Shakti, as part of the command. But you know, when you go to the command, you actually move from the operational level of leadership to a strategic level. Because the Indian Army runs through the chief, vice chief, and the 7 army commanders that are there. And they occupy the high table to take all decisions. As an army commander, of course, your primary duty and task is to look at operations. And if tomorrow there is conflict, then you are the guy who will lead the command to battle in your area of responsibility. But an equally important domain for the army commander is the domain of civil-military relations. I had 10 states, 4 UTs, 52 cantonments under me. And therefore, one of my onerous responsibilities was to also ensure that our quality of life of troops and their families was of a high quality. Beyond that, I had to ensure protection of our area. I had to ensure that land was not encroached. And you know, one day I was being briefed and I realized that most of the cases were favorable to us, but in the final one, the case went against us. So I asked my staff to do a research, and they came to a conclusion that a small thing, and when I tell you, you'll be surprised and shocked. You know, uh, the real estate guys who were involved in that encroachment, because in Maharashtra, down South India, the real estate is really very, very precious, and there have been many scams. What they used to do was the records of land were not computerized. So they were in files and maps. And there used to be one chaprasi or some class 4 employee who knew which map belonged to which. On the date of the final hearing, they would ensure, or whenever it was required, that guy went on emergency leave. And therefore, we could not produce those proofs. And therefore, I put in place, the first thing that happened was digitization of all land records. The first command to do that was Southern Command, because we had so much land. So, you know, it has been, the other thing that I think I did was, when I reached Southern Command, I issued a 4-5 page document called the Southern Star Philosophy. Southern Star is our formation sign, those 4 stars. And it gave guidance. Because I said in today's transparent world, Bakshiji, it is very important that you put down your ideas in black and white. There are no shades of gray. Nobody should be left in doubt as to what is his role, what is the expectation from him. Of course, it gave general guidance on operations, on logistics, on cantonments. But in the end, I laid down what was my notion of a good military officer in Southern Command in the 21st century. And I still remember the words. I wrote, my idea of an officer of the 21st century for the Indian Army was humility in his persona. A humble guy, however senior he may be, when he talks to elderly, when he talks to the weak, he's humble. Humility in his persona and arrogance in his uniform. Somebody told me, General, the word arrogance is negative. I said, no. I want, the moment he wears his uniform, he becomes a tiger. He becomes a tiger, and based on his integrity, on his competence, and on his commitment. Wow. And doesn't have, I said, I don't want my officers to have a flexible spine. I want them ramrod straight, so that they stand up. If they can't stand up in peacetime, how will they stand up in war? So,
Thank you.
My own philosophy of life, if I can say, has been based on 2-3 parameters. And I can just, I've never looked at them like that, but generally, if I look back, that's how I will conclude. First has been, give more than you receive. I told my children that if you can get joy out of giving, you are king. You don't need anything. Most of us want, our wants are never ending. When we get something, we want the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But if you can get joy, equal joy out of giving, then you are king. So give more than you receive. Second is the motto, share and care. I think it is very important for leaders, not only in the armed forces, but across the board. Genuine sharing and caring, and the people can see through it, at least in the armed forces, even outside. Why not? And the third focus has been that my outlook and actions were always based on a combination of my mind and heart. On a combination of my mind and heart. And I dare say that most of the time, I could come to a reasonable outcome based on this combination. So I have given an overall glimpse. And let me also put a word of caution. And this word of caution, Bakshiji, came to me when I was a lieutenant colonel, again in military operations. I had a boss who later became army commander and a very educated, intelligent, forceful personality. And when he went on promotion as brigadier, he wrote a letter to me. And I still remember that letter because it was a defining piece of advice. And he wrote that one of the great joys of serving as director MO4 was to have you as my subordinate. One of the great joys of serving in military operations 4 as director was to have you as my subordinate. Next paragraph. Professional arrogance may be justified in your case. Professional arrogance may be justified in your case, but it takes a strong boss to take you in his stride.
Wow.
So tread carefully and you will go far.
Oh, wow.
What he was telling me was that in the army, seniority also matters. So, you have to be, he was not telling me to be differential, but he was saying, do tread carefully. And I gave you 2-3 notes that I had done. So, Bakshiji, I have given a glimpse of the Indian Army. मेरा तो वजूद ही इस यूनिफॉर्म से जुड़ा हुआ है, and I explained it. I think my wife often tells me that why do you bother about the army? Sometimes you're going to meet the chief, sometimes you're advising him, sometimes you're doing this. As Sumiti, I remain a stakeholder in the well-being of the Indian Army, and I will continue to do so, whatever is in my abilities to make the Indian Army better. That's a story of the uniform.
Oh, mind-boggling. It has been fascinating to hear such a wonderful journey you have. General Singh, I am actually feeling so delighted that you shared such a powerful, you are a tiger. You're a tiger, Singh. You talk about mind and heart and connect of mind and heart. And that is where trust and team building comes. And when you talk about humility in your persona and arrogance in uniform, yes, when you are wearing the army uniform, you should be arrogant to destroy the enemy. Sir, on this question itself, I came across a statement which you have made. And let me read out that statement. You have said, in armed forces, you cannot afford to come runner up even once. You are the first resort of the nation. There is nobody behind us. And if you fail even once, the nation would pay a heavy price. That conscience is instilled into each one of us. Every time a task is given, it has to be accomplished. Oh my God, there is no room for failure. There is no room for coming second. There is straight, you go and you win. Now, I want to know, as an army commander, what kind of attributes, braveness, consistency, discipline, energy, firmness, faith, and above all, the passion is required. A quick response, because we need to move with the time. We are already late.
Bakshiji, I'll cover it quickly. Let me talk, not as an army commander, but let me talk as an army man. The Indian Army, and I'm sure the Air Force and Navy included, have certain core values. And it has become even more necessary today to protect those core values as they are under stretch. The first core value of the armed forces is that we are apolitical. I have a right to vote even in service, but as an organization, we have no preference. We serve the constitution of the country and the government of the day. Now, that is a great let's say, onerous responsibility on us, not only on us, on the polity, on our government, on our politicians to protect. So the first core value is we are apolitical. The second core value of the Indian Army is that we are secular. Secular in the terms that we live together, we fight together, irrespective of region, religion, caste, or creed. And we are highly professional. In fact, a true epitome of the constitution of this country. The Indian Army comes first, and next I found was Andaman Nicobar. It actually is a very good representation. People call it mini India. But now coming to the second part. Leadership, Bakshiji, since our topic is leadership is present in all walks of life.
Absolutely.
So what's so special about leadership in the armed forces? Quickly, I'll narrate. There are three issues which distinguish leadership in the armed forces to the outside world. The first is an unlimited liability contract. When you join the armed forces, you don't sign this contract, but by joining the armed forces, you virtually give yourself up to the nation and to the armed forces. Hereafter, you do as you are asked to do, even at the risk of injury to life and limb. So the unlimited liability contract. Even your families get bound by it. Your son may be going through a 10th class, but if you are deployed in an operation area, you won't come on leave, and your wife will have to manage as best as she can. The second thing is that leadership in the armed forces is not about profit and loss.
Oh,
It is about life and death issues.
absolutely.
And therefore, Bakshiji, motivation in the armed forces has to be on a higher plane. In a corporate, you want to motivate your team, you send them on a holiday to Goa. You give them an increment of pay. Pray tell me, can you ask somebody to go to his death by giving him an increment of pay? It has to be on the higher plane. It has to be about trust. It has to be about camaraderie. It has to be about your regimental spirit. It is about the nation. It is about the army. It is about standing up for what you believe in. It is leadership in the army is about putting yourself in harm's way before you put your subordinates. And lastly, there is no place for runners up. So you have to win again and again, time and again.
Wow.
And if the army loses even once, the nation pays a heavy price. And this is instilled and ingrained in all of us. So there is no question of actually not performing.
That is where I will respect all army personnel at any level and salute them always. Whenever I find an opportunity at the airport or at the railway stations, I see army personnel, I start clapping for them. That is the respect. General Singh, on the same question, now when I look at yourself, you have been an example of handling both kinds of leadership roles. One at the army leadership role and other as a lieutenant governor. Is there any difference between the two? Or it is the same? Is there some new DNA into both of them or is the same DNA?
Well, Bakshiji, let me quickly cover. And we discussed, you can, host that article or
I will
something
be
on
doing
your
that.
site. So people will be able to see the nitty-gritty of what we achieved in Andaman.
Sure, sure,
So
sure.
I'll not get into that. This question has been often asked to me. General Singh, what difference have you found in leadership as an army commander and thereafter as a lieutenant colonel? Well, let me say, you deal with human resource on both sides. On one side, you deal with a highly disciplined human resource. On the other side, you deal with the din and chaos of democracy. And as Lieutenant Governor of Andaman, I had the responsibility. There was nobody else, just a member of parliament and Panchayati Raj, PRIs. I was the administrator, I was the head of the administration. I had all the powers, except sometimes I had to go back to the center, to the Home Minister or the Prime Minister for seeking some extra financial aid. But beyond that, I was also a constitutional head. And this advice was given to me by the Prime Minister. The General, please remember, you are also a representative of the people. So don't be aloof from them. They have nobody else to go to. And I remembered that all my life. In all those 3 years, that is 3+ years, I spent in Andaman. Let me tell you about my experience in Andaman. What was different in dealing with issues both in the army? Administration in the civil side is run through bureaucrats, police, forest, and a host of other services. Highly intelligent. In fact, the creme de la creme of a country who join these services, very intelligent, very qualified, very competent. But where they lack, which I found, I was quite surprised, they lacked in commitment. They lacked in passion for the job.
And discipline.
When in the army you get a job, you have to take it to its finality.
True.
It's a mission. You have to accomplish it. In the civil, it's a file with a file number. And once the authority writes a remark on it, he forgets about it. And quite often, it has become the norm and quite fashionable to negate a good idea. So you can quote the rules and write 10 things as to why this can't be done. But the same guy will never write as to how it should be done. But that's not his commitment. He's not bothered about that. He just wants to write on the file and he forgets it. So that was one difference that I found. The second difference I found, and this was not in the army, as a leader, when you say something, you mean it. And you want your subordinates to do it that way. It can be no other way. In the civil side, my chief secretary was a very good man, high integrity, he just retired. He once came to me after 3-4 months. He said, sir, may I take the liberty of saying, you always keep telling me that we are lethargic and things are not moving. He said, sir, you will find a distinct change. So I said, what have I done? Why is this change coming? He said, sir, we were observing you. And now we are convinced in the last few months that we have seen you, that you mean what you say and you want us to do exactly what you say. We have been used to, he told me, we have been used to our bosses, political and otherwise, saying one thing, meaning another thing, and wanting us to do the third thing. So there was the total disconnect. Bakshiji, I made it a point that I went around the full island because one look is equal to 1,000 words. So I traveled, and you mentioned I moved on motorcycle where there was no transport, things, but I traveled all over and I sought the views of the people. Once I came back and I formed up my ideas, then there was nothing stopping me. Of course, I was treading over a lot of vested interests, and those vested interests would not hesitate to write against me to the Honorable Prime Minister off and on. But I had the support of the Prime Minister. He had all the inputs, the Prime Minister, through the setup that he had. And so I had his blessings in the way that I moved forward. And I never hesitated. And let me say two things. One is, integrity has been my hallmark. I have never sought anything that is not due to me. And the second is, I was not too interested in seeking an extension. So once these two things were out of the thing, I was fully focused. I used to work 24/7. My family used to be in Delhi. They used to visit me sometimes. So from morning to evening, it was of course, I found time for my cycling. Of course, I found time to meet the people and so on and so on. So
that's what my question is. What were you doing, driving motorbike, driving a jeep yourself, going on the top of the trees, fallen trees? What was that passion?
Let me just qualify that. Actually, the moment I reached Andaman, I realized that Andaman is subject to almost 100 tremors in a year, out of which at least 30, 40 are above 5 on the Richter scale. We had suffered a tsunami also in 2004. And therefore, the first thing I did was to look at the management of disaster. And I realized there were a lot of loopholes and I corrected them. So we held an exercise which was admired by the center, by the NDMA, by all the states. And immediately 1 week after that, we had Leher, the worst cyclone that has hit Andaman in living memory. And in the morning when I got up, I found everything had uprooted. Some of the roof of Rajnivas was up. So I asked my bearer, ADC saab ko bulaiye, and it looked, the wind was over 130, 140 kilometers. And the palm trees were almost touching the ground. He said, सब पूरा Port Blair पेड़ों से घिरा हुआ है, कोई आ नहीं सकता, सब communication टूट गया है. So I said, I tried to ring up the DGP and the Chief Secretary, and we were out of communication. So finally, I told my guard, I said, you bring out the police gypsy, and started, वो तार जोड़ के उन्होंने start कर दी. The driver घर से नहीं आया था, so I sat in the driver's vehicle. I reached the Chief Secretary's house, told him to come down. He quickly changed, called the DGP, and we had a police backup, and we went around the city. Bakshiji leading from the front. Soon the buzz was around that the Lieutenant Governor is out on the streets. Wherever we got a tree that was uprooted, the policeman virtually lifted it across. And Port Blair came out, and I think within 48 to 72 hours, they had brought normalcy back to Port. And there are many such incidents. Even in Pondicherry, when I was there once, and if you remember, there were severe floods in Chennai and also in Pondicherry. So I was visiting Pondicherry at that time. And I asked the administration that, please tell me, how are you coping with it? And everybody kept passing the buck down till it reached the deputy commissioner, who was a young lad, young officer, very little service. And then I realized that things were not coordinated. So next day I called a meeting. And from Chief Secretary, DGP, everyone was there. And I gave them directions. I said, I've understood what is happening. Now this is what you will do. And then I said, all of you, please follow me. So I came, I told my ADC, that locality which has drains overflowing, where there's danger of health hazard, please drive me there. He said, sir, but there the water is almost waist deep. I said, doesn't matter, you drive. So I moved in front, and the rest of the administration following behind. You see that picture of the Mercedes vehicle standing in almost waist deep water. Now everybody was in the vehicle till I came out. And when I came out, then nobody had any choice. They all had to come out and start looking. So these are things which leaders can, by small examples, by small actions, they can motivate a large number of people.
You can go on and on. There's so much.
You look at our honorable Prime Minister. I mean, there's so much to learn from the way he can motivate.
Sir, General Singh, that's where I'm coming now. I'm turning towards now authentic leadership. Here comes our Honorable Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. I could see that during the period you were Lieutenant Governor, there have been regular interactions with Prime Minister Modi. It would be great if you could share some of the real experiences you had with such a great Prime Minister India has produced. And he is actually today one of the genuine and authentic leaders, not only for India, for the global world. Audience will surely be keen to know about your interactions with such a great...
Bakshiji, I was lucky. I first met then Chief Minister Modi ji in Gujarat, because Gujarat was one of the states part of Southern Command from the army side. And I remember it very distinctly. You couldn't but help be impressed by his aura, by his authority, that here was a man who was in command. And we had a lot of civil military issues between the army and the state of Gujarat. And in that short meeting of about 20 minutes, because he was very busy, he had read about them, and we arrived quickly at acceptable solutions. And there were one or two things which he said, General Sahab, you can keep pending this point again and again and again, but this won't happen. So, direct, upfront, and it was such a pleasure. Next time I met him was when I was detailed to be the Lieutenant Governor, me, my wife, and younger son, we were at the VIP lounge of the airport waiting to catch a flight to Port Blair. And there was commotion. And who comes in? Chief Minister Modi Saab. He was then the chairman of the election committee or something of the party. And I told him, he looked at me and I explained to him where I was headed to, and he gave me good wishes. Now, I was lucky enough to be called for his swearing in on 26th of May 2014. Soon thereafter, I asked for an appointment, and very promptly, a few days thereafter, I got an appointment to brief him. So he's a very patient listener. I mean, that's one quality which I think a top leader must have. He should listen. Most of us who have been at the higher level like to hear our own voice. But that's an affliction we need to get rid of. And I think he's the right man. So I briefed him on Andaman, but I had also, Bakshiji, taken a paper on what needs to be done by the Honorable Prime Minister for defense. So I told him, I said, sir, my whole life I've spent in defense. I met you in Gujarat. So I said, sir, I've written down things absolutely bluntly to the point on every aspect, operation, this, that, and the other. And Prime Minister may like to read it in his own time. And he said, certainly, jarur padhenge. And then I said, to conclude, can I request for two things to be brought to your notice, or can I bring two things to your notice? And I said, the first is the National War Memorial. I said it has been pending for years and decades. And so he looked at me. I said, let me explain, sir. Then as a Prime Minister, you will go on 26 January to lay the wreath at India Gate. It has names of the martyrs only up to World War II or maybe World War I. I said, there is no name of the martyrs of independent India's wars. It is something that is pending. He nodded his head. I said, sir, the second thing is there has been talk and committee after committee about jointness and integration of the armed forces, the appointment of a chief of defense staff and joint commands, integrated theater commands. You know what he told me? He said, General Saab, these two issues are also in my mind and they are also part of my party's agenda. And you see this, both events, major events have been done by the National War Memorial, a pride for every Indian, not only the armed forces, pride for every Indian. Absolutely. And second, the CDS has been appointed and we are going to move forward on the path of jointness and integration. Beautiful. So let me say that whenever I sought a meeting with him, I was granted a meeting. I mean, lesser mortals may feel very important and not give time, but he gave time immediately. Always a patient listener. And let me say, most of the time when I met the Honorable Prime Minister, I was not seeking something, but keeping him informed what I was doing. And because I told him once, I said, so that there's too much of vested interest and they will keep. So I thought I will inform you myself. Gave me a patient hearing, and his silence actually gave me the courage to go ahead with the most difficult decisions that I could. So his support was always there, always there. And in my farewell speech, I said, what we have accomplished, in my view, are based on the Prime Minister's blessings, on the love and affection of the people, on the love and affection of the people, the hard teamwork of my administration, and whatever I could contribute based on what I had imbibed in the Indian Army. So I put the 4 landmarks to what I had done.
Beautiful, sir.
So I think for me, it remains a very pleasant interlude, my meetings with the Honorable Prime Minister on multiple occasions. And I met him once after coming back also at some function at the Army House, and he was very, very warm.
He is a great global leader, not only an Indian leader, he shows the way to the global world today. A lot of respect to Prime Minister Modi. I had a pleasure of meeting him in Bangkok, Sawadee Modi. So, Lieutenant General sir, now my question is, this COVID-19 pandemic has destroyed a lot of businesses. Businesses are in, destruction. But here is one leadership in crisis. What kind of leadership should be in when there is a crisis like this?
Bakshiji, leadership and crisis are brother in arms.
Wow.
What is leadership without crisis? In normal peacetime, everybody can be a good leader because there is no crisis. Leaders emerge when there is a crisis. And some existing leaders fail, and some leaders who people did not think of rise in crisis.
Absolutely.
Let me talk, and you are hinting both at our civil world and the corporate world. Let me say there are two types. Let's just talk of the corporate world. There are two types of industry or ventures. One is those who live by the day and who bask in the sun, on the glory of the sun's rays on that day. But there's another leader, there's another venture that looks at the future, that looks at contingencies, that understands that the 21st century is a VUCA environment. VUCA is violent, uncertain, and ambiguous. Complex and ambiguous, VUCA environment. So they know that there are disruptive things which can happen, and technology is changing so fast. So far, there were crises, but they were localized to spots. So Afghanistan was a crisis, but how did it affect the industry in India? I mean, bombing could happen in Afghanistan, it didn't affect us. Hong Kong could be there. COVID-19 has brought the whole world on the crisis map. And therefore, those leaders who were slightly mentally alert and prepared are able to tide over it. Same with the government. So just make 2-3 quick points. And we are talking of higher level leadership. The first job of a leader in such crisis time is to absorb the crisis and reflect confidence that he can deal with it. You watch our Prime Minister. Please watch our Prime Minister. Has he ever shown that he's unable to deal with this?
Never.
We all know it is a very serious crisis. But when you see the top man is confident, talking to you that this too shall pass, that we will do X, Y, Z. So the confidence, absorbing the crisis and showing the confidence. The second thing is that you need to be upfront. You need to be truthful with your subordinates. You have to tell them the way it is. Well, momentarily, you may have to hide some facts or put them out to avoid panic. But eventually, in the 21st century, you cannot hide facts. And if you are not transparent, rumors start happening. Let me just say on the COVID-19, when I first saw this migrant crisis that happened, I tweeted to the Honorable Prime Minister, to the Honorable Raksha Mantri, to say that this is a crisis that is happening and let's use the armed forces, the police forces, whatever we have to. And obviously at the India level, it's a huge number and very complex thing. There are no easy answers. But this was one thing that we could have dealt with in a slightly more energetic manner. We did not realize the crisis. You see, there comes the point. The top leader takes all the decisions. But what about people below? They have to analyze. They have to put their finger on the crisis point and put it up to the top leader to understand. In the armed forces, we have something called contingency planning, Bakshiji. Whenever we make an operational plan, there are contingencies and contingencies. So you make an operational plan that you have to go to from A place to B place and attack this place and capture. Now you always work out what could go wrong in that process. A could happen, B could happen, C could happen, D could happen, and you make contingency plans. So when those crises happen, you actually are able to deal with them. I gave you an example. The moment I landed in Andaman, I put in place the disaster management drills, and a whole year was spent in perfecting those drills. And we saw of course, we will all be much wiser now. And let me say, COVID-19 will pass, but this is not the end of the VUCA world. This world will continue to remain volatile, uncertain, complex. And we, whether we are in the civil, whether we are in the armed forces, or we are in the corporate world, must be alert to the next crisis and not dwell on the last crisis. We must start looking at what could go wrong. Are we prepared for such a thing? That's my take.
Very great. In fact, I have changed VUCA from volatile to vision, uncertain to unknown, unheard, business practices, complex to competency, and ambiguous to alignment. So, in case we think positive and we can change this VUCA, and this I talked in 2018 and 2019 when people were talking about VUCA. Now, this COVID-19 is super duper VUCA. It's 50 times, 100 times. I have the last question coming to you. You know, I am running a program called Women Power, a Global Movement, wherein I plan to have 100,000 women by 2021 on this platform, irrespective of caste, creed, color, religion, and 1 million women on this platform by 2024. Now, women are the power of. What do you think in terms of leadership? Whether it is army leadership, whether it is corporate leadership, business leadership, or government leadership, do you see women becoming much more stronger in terms of leadership, compassion, especially, and of course, education?
Yeah, the straightforward answer is yes. The future will see. There is no choice. The future will see the rise of women power in diverse fields, whether it be political, whether it be social, whether it be corporate, whether it be armed forces is a slightly separate, and I will talk of that. India has always, revered Durga, Shakti. The Indian women, let me say, they are far stronger, mentally far stronger. Their ability to bear pain is far more intense than what men folk have. Well, yes, we have, things have been improving over the years, but we are nowhere near optimum. And I think the infusion of women in leadership positions at various leadership levels in all walks of life uh, will always empower our nation. Now, coming to the armed forces. As far as the armed forces are concerned, we inducted women in the officer cadre, um, in the Army Medical Corps, in the Nursing Corps. Okay. And a few decades back, we started inducting them only at the officer level in our logistic units, ordnance, ASC, EME, and some supporting arms like engineers, air defense. And they've had to fight their way through. Initially, they were short service, but recently, based on Supreme Court orders, they are now being given permanent commission after 14 years. And they are also going to be considered for command of units composed of men. And but one thing is there, to command those units, there will be no separate platform. They will have to compete with their male colleagues. And I'm sure there will be some women who will prove themselves up to the challenge and they will get command. What has been debatable has been the induction of women in our combat arms who do the fighting up front, infantry, armored corps, that is tanks, mechanized infantry who move in personal carriers. And there has been a reluctance on the part of the army to induct women there. And there are two ways to argue it. Some women, of course, argue very strongly that women can do any role. You give us the chance. On the other hand, the army's views, and a lot of us subscribe to that view, is that there are enough men volunteers available for such missions. Most of the nations who are inducting women there are not getting volunteers. Indian Army is a volunteer army. We have a rural base, and mind you, you put women there. I mean, maybe when technology empowers us so much, maybe women would be welcome. But today, even in operational matters, women have a very, very, uh, let's say, lucrative role in diverse fields: space, cyber, intelligence. They are part of operations. We don't have to push our women to do hand-to-hand fighting in front. So I think India certainly needs larger number of women leaders in all walks of life, Pakshi.
Thank you so much. Sir, last question. I have to go to the questions from audiences. Lieutenant General, I came across this article written by a local guy called Sanjeev Kumar Roy from Port Blair. He titled Army General Who Won the People Heart. And another cover story I read was Mutual Respect by Vinita Deshmukh. The articles are very awesome, wherein your journey of excellence as Lieutenant Governor has been shared. I wish we had time to go through these two wonderful masterpieces written about yourself. In fact, I'm going to share the same on social media after this program so that it goes to millions of people around the world about the elegant leadership style of yours. Now, because this talks about even after 4 years, after leaving the Lieutenant Governor position, people are still in connect with you. Tell me one General Singh, one that extraordinary leadership trait which Your Excellency you have to be extraordinary personality. One leadership trait of yours. Sir, you have to unmute. Sir, you have to unmute.
I would say it's very difficult to capture the some nichode of everything or the essence of leadership in one word. But uh, let me put it in as short as I can. Okay.
Sure, sir.
The first thing is that you have to be true to your calling. You have to be truthful to yourself. You have to be truthful to your responsibilities. So I think that becomes the most enduring quality. And you know, Bakshiji, when we talked of it that day at lunch, when you are a leader, you have become a leader. You know, it is different from a senior person. You can be a senior general and you may have authority of the President of India, but you may not be a leader. To become a leader, you need to have those essential traits that we talked of, the 5 C's and many others. Once I was lecturing at an army forum where I talked of leadership. I often give lectures, and I'll be more than willing to come and talk at your forum more on leadership, strategic leadership, operational leadership, cutting edge leadership. But let me say, so one colonel got up and said, General, he asked the same question. He said, General, you have given us such a wide sweep of leadership. Please name 2 qualities in a senior leader that, in your view, are the hallmark of an outstanding leader. So I said, all things being equal, in my view, a strategic leader, an operational leader, a senior leader must have broad shoulders and large heart. Broad shoulders to absorb adversity, broad shoulders to condone the mistakes of his subordinates, and a large heart to forgive.
Wow.
That's the hallmark, in my view. At least I have followed that.
Oh my God, sir. I can go on and on, but I need to ask questions. Now, I got questions here from many people, and I got a question coming. We are very proud of our army, but we have come across some incidents, though few and far between. But some officers, unfortunately, are found to be involved in corruption. After such, huge training, strenuous training, and finer values, which are drilled, DNA of this. Why should it happen? Because when we fight someone for pride of our army, they throw such enormities on our face. Usha Rana Potedar from Thailand. She is asking this question. And quick
Well,
response.
Madam Usha, your point is, let's say, of concern to all of us. Ideally, there should be no such cases. But we are a huge organization, and I'm not making any apologies. In fact, a 1.3 million strong armed force, which is coming from the same society. And again, I'm not taking that as an excuse, coming from the same society where corruption is very rampant. Though at higher levels it has been controlled under the Honorable Prime Minister, but at the lower levels, you go out and you will still find it prevalent. And I will narrate a very interesting story about Andaman on corruption. But before that, to answer your question. See, the armed forces also have people who cross the line, though it is few and far between. When it happens at the lower level, you take it in your stride. But when it happens at a higher level, you get concerned. But let me state what is the difference. The difference is if there is any act of misdemeanor or misconduct on probity matters in the armed forces, the army takes immediate action. We do not tolerate any such incident. And one of the reasons is that such people lie low at the time when they have people who do not tolerate. And when they get a chance, so maybe I think the armies and the armed forces are looking at refining our selection systems, trying to pinpoint such people early in their service so that we can weed them out. It's not an easy task, but we are continuously at it. But let me narrate an incident on corruption in Andaman Bakshiji. Can I?
Sure, sir.
You know, our Honorable Prime Minister, when he took over charge first time, his clarion call was zero tolerance for corruption. Okay. So in Andaman, everybody knew about it, that I would not tolerate it. And after 3-4 months, I called a meeting of all my administration, Naib Tehsildar upwards, Sub-Inspector upwards. I got them into a hall. And I gave them my vision and the way I work, because they had observed me, and I said, it's now time to tell them exactly what I expect them to do. And after talking to them for about half an hour, 40 minutes, I came to my last point, and that was zero tolerance for corruption. And I said directly to them, I said, Andaman has been known for a very high level of corruption. I said, but I am not going to tolerate. Bakshiji, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yeah. So I said, I'm not going to tolerate any such thing. And I request any of you, I'm not going to dig up old things, but in my tenure, if there is a single case that comes to my notice, I will take the strictest action. You can please. And then I said something which shocked the whole hall. And I said, if you are so ingrained into corruption and you are not ready to change, then maybe I can join you in corruption. You know, and when they heard this, there was a hushed silence. But I said, I have one condition. I said, tell me, this illegal wealth that you are going to amass, when you go on your final journey, how will you take it with you? Heaven or hell? Or how will you send it in advance? So I told them, I said, please don't do such things. The youth, your own children will not respect you if they know that the money that you're getting is ill-got. So thank you, madam, for raising this. It's a very important issue. It remains an important issue for us as a nation and as the armed forces.
Yeah, I am Aditya Vidyasagar. Aditya, you have a question. Aditya, go ahead.
Yes, sir. It has really been too good. I just wanted to ask, can we not discipline our civil services, the officers and the everybody in the civil services, to actually act and behave like the way our defense forces do? Can they be?
Aditya,
Can they be oriented so?
Aditya ji, thank you for reposing so much faith. I know the whole nation reposes faith in the armed forces. That's a pressure point for us. It's a pressure point that we can't let down the nation. Now you come to another point that, and this has been talked of earlier. There have been suggestions that why can't we route all government servants for a small stint in the army? At the moment, IS officers go for a 10, 15-day attachment. That's not enough. I think as far as corruption is concerned, it starts, the solution lies at the solution has to be top down, top first.
True.
It has got, and you know, in our honorable Prime Minister's zero policy of zero tolerance for corruption, I think at the top level things have improved greatly. But for it to trickle down to the bottom level will take some time. But we need to persist. There is no other way. Yes, discipline is an important ingredient. But you know, democracy mitigates against discipline. So everybody seems to have a viewpoint. I don't have any solution to this.
Can I interrupt and give you
Yes,
the
please.
solution that you have so well interconnected with our honorable Prime Minister, and he listens to you and he actually delivers what you ask for. Can you please put this into his mind?
Yeah, you can see that it has been his focus, Mr. Aditya. This has been our Prime Minister's focus,
Yeah.
and he continues to focus. He's disciplined himself. He expects the others to be so disciplined, and I'm sure that the difference will come. The difference will come. But I think what gives me hope is the younger generation of today. You know, soon after independence, we had an idealistic generation. Idealistic, largely. But then came our generation, which was born after independence, grew up in the 20th century. And I think the motto changed from idealism to ahead at any cost.
Mhm.
And in that race to be ahead at any cost, I think we crossed a lot of lines. But the youth of today, I think, is moving, inching. I won't say they are galloping, but they are inching towards idealism. Please look in your own family and you will find the children of today, when they are stopped by a policeman, will never hardly offer him an inducement. They'll be willing to pay the fine or argue with him or whatever. So there is a change happening. And I think this change will happen with the youth. And I think we need to encourage them in moving towards idealism. And it cannot be the responsibility of one person or one group. This is a national problem, and this will only solve itself when I say that India may become great. India has always been great from millennia, but India may become a very powerful. We are already a very powerful country based on our economy, on our talent, on our people, on the armed forces, on our institutions. But for us to become great again, we have to improve our social norms. Our society has to bring in pressure. You have so many things happening in society. You can't blame the police and the government for that. It's a societal problem. And the society consists of whom? All of us. And I think we need to assert on those issues. Only then India find its true potential.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And since time is running out, I'll not take much time. But
Yeah,
just
yeah.
one.
Aditya, I have 7, 8 people waiting.
Okay. Please go
Aditya,
ahead and General
Aditya,
Singh,
you can-
allow me to get in touch with you. And I have
Yeah,
something
sure,
where Minister
you can-
Bakshi can do a lot.
Yes.
I'll talk about it. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank
I
you.
have Mr. RP Ananta Raju. I am unmuting you, sir, for your quick question, sir, and a quick response. I'm going for 2 hours already. Yes, sir.
You had
Can
one.
Mr. Raju. Mr. Raju, I unmute you.
But you can take somebody else.
Okay, Mr. Rotarian JP Malhotra Saab, you can go ahead with your question.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Yes, sir, good evening.
Yes,
General
Malhotra
Saab, let me first, I feel happy to have attended this program, and I appreciate your forthright views on working of the armed forces as well as the civil administration. My question is, sir, we have a lot of integrity, safety, security, empowerment in the defense forces. When can we have the 33% women working in services? Because इतना काम है आर्मी में, आर्म फोर्सेस में, जितना सोसाइटी में आज इविल्स हैं अगेंस्ट द वुमेन, lot of it will be taken care of if defense forces come forward and take 1/3 of their strength to be given to women. And that is substantiating D.K. Bakshi's program. Okay, he wants to empower women. And army, in my opinion, and after hearing your straightforward views, categorical statements, I feel army is capable and has got the capacity to empower women in whatever fashion, sir, you may enumerate, sir. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Malhotra, I think you make valid and important points, but let me answer it like this. The army has very honorable intentions of empowering women within their services. But the abiding policy is hasten but slowly. We have a job to do, and the best person for that job has to be taken. The army is your institution of last resort. So if you need a woman to be there in the intelligence branch, well, that's where we should recruit her. We want a woman to handle our computers and be part of something else, well, that's where we'll get her. We have a large number of women in the medical corps, in the nursing services, etc., etc. But I think to lay down, the army does not lay down any reservations. We are against reservations. The best person for that job, I'm not saying the best man for that job, the best
Okay.
person for that job will be recruited. But before you come to the army, to solve the problems of the country, I think we need larger infusion of women and representation of women in police forces, in the administrative services, revenue services, income tax, forest officials, all these, in politics, in members of parliament. Let's have more women there. The armed forces have a plan, and they are moving ahead slowly and surely, so that women power is optimized in the army. It is not about showcasing women. It is about optimizing the actual.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mullah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I have Mr. Arun Malhotra, please? I am unmuting you. Mr. Arun Malhotra.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, General.
Yeah.
I'm an old timer, pre-independence model, as you would like to say, and something I would like to know from you. You see, we have listened to military and corporate leadership from you over the last 1.5 hours. What about political leadership? An army man is required to remain aloof from political environment. In fact, I remember in the 60s when I was an officer, we were told by the CEO, never talk politics, it's a dirty place. Never talk of gold, it is bad. Don't talk of finance, it is bad. Anyway, coming to the politics.
Yeah.
Why? If we do not represent ourselves in the political arena, the welfare and interest of the armed forces will never be promulgated. Is there a change in the army?
Let me say you have hit the nail on the head. Let me explain without taking too much time. When I say the armed forces have to be apolitical, I'm not at all suggesting that as individuals, we don't have a right to make a choice of our local representatives where we vote. And as an institution and in service, I think it's best to keep the army away from politics. But then a large number of very capable army officers and jawans retire year after year. They enrich our society through their discipline, through their capabilities, through their focus. And I agree with you. I agree with you fully that the armed forces need greater representation in our polity. You see why? You look at the list of American presidents, barring a few, virtually all of them have served in the armed forces at some time or the other. In the Indian polity, that is not so. And I think an infusion of capable army officers and jawans in the states and at the center is something that is a desirable thing. I fully support your view. But let me also state, when an, when an, when an army man becomes a political representative, he cannot act like the rest of the political representatives. He has a lot of responsibility on his. Everybody looks at him. He cannot remove that army man's tag. So his behavior, his way of working has to be different. And therefore, I say that those army men who want to join politics, and most welcome, most welcome. We need more representation for the sake of the country, for the security of our nation, for the betterment of the armed forces. You are absolutely right. But they have to set the gold standard. They have to set the gold standard in politics. This is my personal.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Malhotra. Thank you for saying.
Can I have Mr. Murli? I unmute you, Mr. Murli. Go ahead, your question.
Good evening, General AK. Thank you for the wonderful exposition. It's great to share whatever you had to say. My views are on actually concerning defense of the island territories. You think our island territories are adequately integrated into the defense requirement of the mainland? Thank you.
Is that Murli from the Air Force?
Yes, very much.
My coachmate?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank
Anyway, let me state, Bakshi ji, we can have a separate session on Andaman Nicobar Islands one day. And let me say, bulk of the people in the country not aware. And I'll give you an example. Once somebody went to give a parcel in the post office and he wrote Port Blair. So that guy asked, "Apne country to mention nahi kiya iske andar." Once for the elections, paramilitary force was tasked to come to Andaman. Though I told them we don't need, we are a peaceful place, but they still sent. You know what were the orders? I won't name that, from the headquarters of that force, saying that please reserve 2 bogies for move of our personnel from Chennai to Port Blair. How the hell do bogies go on the sea? That is the awareness. So Bakshi ji, you can organize one, and I'll be delighted to talk about it.
I
But
think we do that.
Murli, to just specifically talk of your question, Andaman Nicobar has the first tri-service operational command of our country, the Andaman Nicobar Command. And let me say, they are virtually like an unsinkable aircraft carrier for India. They give us tremendous strategic advantage. 1,200 kilometers from the mainland, but just a few hundred kilometers from Southeast Asia. We are hugging that coastline. We dominate the Straits of Malacca. We dominate the Andaman Sea. We dominate the sea lanes of communication. Well, in broad, if I was to say, without going into details for obvious reasons, in broad, if I was to say, the policy of the government is to create the infrastructure and wherewithal in Andaman that tomorrow, if we need infusion of larger forces from the Army, Navy, Air Force, there is infrastructure available, and that is going on as per a plan. What we have currently in Andaman is adequate for peacetime kind of threats, which are prevalent: poaching, migration of illegal migration, and things like that. Incidentally, let me mention Andaman Nicobar Islands. Their maritime boundary is completely delineated, and there is no problem with any of our neighbors there. So I think it's a toss-up how much you want to station there. But what we certainly need is good infrastructure so that in a time of crisis, we can quickly move men and material to that place.
Thank you very much. Now I have many more questions coming in. In case there can be a quick one, Nilesh ji. Mr. Nilesh, I can unmute you quick. and a quick response because we are almost.
Bakshi ji, let them ask. Time aapka, main to I will take on all questions, but I will be quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Sandeep Yadav ji.
Yeah, good evening, General A.K. Singh ji. It's a wonderful learning in 1.5 hours. In such a short period, we learned so many things from you. And I just have a question for you. Western countries have a compulsory military training. Why can't we also have in India so that we all become so disciplined and then we all become stronger and healthier, wealthier, everything. Once we are disciplined, everything will be success.
Sandeep ji, what a pleasure to see you. But let me say that what you are stating is a desirable outcome that all of us, large numbers of us in India want, that if citizens can be rooted through the military, then we will be the better for it. But there are problems. Firstly, countries abroad who have a conscription system or compulsory military service for their citizens, it is out of compulsion. They don't get volunteers. In America, in fact, if you get a person recruited, you get some money for it. And if you extend your service, they pay you some more. In India, there is no dearth of volunteers. So as far as the armed forces are concerned, for every Jawan that we have to recruit, there are 1,000 lined up, and we have a choice. Yes, there is a little issue about officers, but we are tackling it. It's not that there are not adequate volunteers for the officer cadre, but our standards are very stringent. Lakhs and lakhs apply, but when we finally select those 250, 300 for NDA, he has to be really the best to get it. So while ideally it would be desirable, it's practically not possible to get there. But there are other means. The National Cadet Corps is doing yeoman service in giving opportunities to youth. Then you have a lot of people going through paramilitary services, police services, etc. There have also been suggestions that police and other people can also be routed through the army, but it's practically not a very feasible idea in such a large country as ours.
Thank you so much, sir. I have Nilesh. Mr. Nilesh.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead with your question. Quick one.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I can hear you.
Sir, this idea of corruption, no, we say even a country like China, no, it's so strict, they're still plagued by corruption to a large extent. And I say that in our religious practices also, till such time, it is like that, till such time you don't have charawa to the gods, even they say the gods don't get pleased. That has got instilled into the society to a great extent. And people feel like till such time something is offered, nothing can be done. So, don't you require a societal change, maybe from the schools, maybe from institutions, and instilling those practices till such time we don't go to the basics? I don't think we'll be able to root out the evils from this. That's the only thing I wanted to put for the practice.
आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा है. You have spoken absolutely rightly that it's a societal issue. Corruption has gone into our DNA, and most people look for the opportunity. Sometimes they behave when there is no opportunity, but when there is opportunity, it requires real self-discipline to avoid doing such things. And I think a societal change is required, not only on this, on many other issues in our country, where the society needs to come forward. And only then, treatment of women, a whole lot of, I don't want to get involved naming all those things. But I think these are society issues, and the society we better get our act together. You can't go on like this in the 21st century. How will we ever realize our potential? So I think you made a valid point that apart from the government and the police and everyone else, it's basically the society that has to take the initiative. I agree with you.
Thank you so much. Ji, for joining. Jaswinder, you have a question? I am unmuting you. Jaswinder. Jaswinder ji. Okay. Wow, amazing, sir. What a session, sir. Your Excellency, my God, from character to courage to competence to commitment to compassion, and I add to communication, the leadership, what you are talking, give more than you receive, share and care, outlook and action, mind and heart. My God, I don't know what to say, but I can tell you, I want to give you a standing ovation, sir.
Thank you.
You deserve a standing
Thank you,
ovation for from the core of my heart. And I would like my colleague, he is in Narula. He is a Thai Sikh born in Thailand, 4 generations in Thailand, and he is director of my company, Global Talent Company in Thailand. I am unmuting him for his vote of thanks. In Narula is again a passionate leadership coach and a trainer, and we work together on various aspects of roadmap for various organizations globally. Achan in Savadikap.
Sawati Krapom. How are you, Dr. DK Bakshi?
Fantastic, fascinating. India treated me well.
Yes. Before I even go on, my humble and absolutely great discourse this evening, may I, together with you, of course, DK Bakshi, invite the General Singh, to visit Thailand whenever the skies open up, because his thoughts and his discourse today has been just phenomenal. It's too good.
Absolutely, we
So
will.
the invitation is on, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Narula.
Yes. Now let me go on. A dynamic commander, an officer, arrogant and proud of his uniform, a gentleman shown in the humility of his persona. General A.K. Singh, a true pleasure to listen to your discourse and to thank Your Excellency to no end this evening. Let me try to sum up your thoughts today, sir. It's not going to be easy, but I'm going to try to do it. 1, successful leaders get the job done. You know, you truly believe in your calling to your responsibility. And the reason why you need to get the job done is because you have a purpose, you have a vision, and you have a mission, and they are very clear. And we don't want to waste time in the drama of life. We need to achieve. Let us achieve it. Second, leader emerges during crisis. They need to show confidence and positivity during the crisis. They need to be upfront and truthful. They need to lead by example. And very importantly, they need to have contingency plans. Think of the worst case scenario and be able to deal and come up with a sensible plan to deal with it. 3, leaders must lead from the front, should be a walk-around leader, should be an authentic leader with big ears, being a great listener. That is when you know what to do and you find out what is going on. Leaders should have the mind and the heart. The mind, as Professor Hayashi said, you know, they are digital, they are robotic, follow the numbers and the figures, and analog. You know, the heart, to be able to be kind, to be able to be compassionate, to be able to forgive and forget and move on. As a leader, you have to be authentic. You have to be authentic to the extent that you earn the respect of your team. And you can earn the respect of your team by removing the fear of authority so that they can talk to you. You need to create a team, and that's very important. Being a great and an active listener, once again, because they are very important. Looking at Your Excellency life, I can sum it up as follows. You need to dream with ambition and lead with conviction. Leaders must build trust, must build camaraderie, and also a team spirit. And all this can be achieved through adhering to the 5C attributes of a great leader. And they are having a good character, having the courage, being competent, have the commitment, and have the compassion. General, sir, we are very lucky to have listened to you. And for this, I would like to give you a standing ovation. So please, all the audience, join me to giving him standing ovation, sir. What a great discourse. Thank you once again, and good evening, sir.
Thank you, Acharya Kap and General Singh. It has been an amazing evening, and I personally, along with the audience, have learned a lot. And this video of ours, which will be on YouTube, available in next half an hour, everywhere around the world. Those who have been with us, I would like to thank each one of them, and those who are going to be watching it later on. It is an amazing leadership lesson which you gave, sir. From the core of my heart, and on behalf of Global Talent, and on this new leadership, DNA of Leadership series, I must really thank you and salute you for your.
Thank you, Bakshita. Thank you very much. And I would conclude just by saying that one has been privileged to have a wide audience today. And what I spoke was what I have practiced. And let me conclude by saying that leader, big or small, they are all human beings. And it's a human trait to not only have positivities, there are negativities. But the great leader is one who understands his own weakness and tries to overcome them. There is nobody who doesn't have weakness. Well, I think one of my strengths has been that I recognize what my weaknesses are, and I try and make up for them. And I conclude by thanking you and your team for giving me this opportunity. I'd be willing to come on any other subject that you may choose. But I conclude, like all, with my favorite quote, निकले थे अकेले मंजिल की ओर, लोग मिलते गए और कारवां बन गया. धन्यवाद. जय हिंद. Thank you, Bakshita.
And once again, a dynamic officer and a true gentleman. Thank you, Your Excellency, General A.K. Singh. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And I take leave now. I take leave.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Varsha, Global Talent, for the support. And thanks, Acharya, and all the attendees around the world. Thank you very much.